Thank you, Niraj, and I too hope you've had a good first 2 days. I was very pleased by the way you came in here on Wednesday. Just lots of wonderful energy, but you're ready to listen also, and so I hope you've had a great start. I want to introduce one other member of the faculty. I don't actually think she's here this morning, but I want to let you know about her. And this is Mrs. Deborah Roth, who will work this year as Coordinator of Community Service on a part-time basis. As many of you know, we're in the process of restructuring our community service program, and she's going to help us this year. Mrs. Roth received a BA from Wesleyan University with honors in psychology. She's held positions as Assistant Treasurer, Shareholder Relations at JP Morgan First Chicago Trust, and as Manager of Shareholder Relations for Cooper Industries. She's been a Kinkaid parent since 1996 and has served in various volunteer positions, including creating the Lower School International Fair, which many of you will remember, and serving as the Parents Association Community Service Chair for the past 2 years. Mrs. Roth's office will be in the library, and I hope you'll just stop by and say hello to her, and particularly those of you that are really interested in helping us get the community service program going. It would be great to meet her. In the world of education, which is where I hang out much of the time, there's been an enormous amount of interest in the last few years in what is sometimes called 21st century learning and teaching. It is a little ironic in that we are 12 years into the 21st century already. Perhaps this explosion should have taken place 12 or more years ago, but of course most people understand that the phrase 21st century teaching and learning is just a metaphor enabling educators and parents to think about the skills, knowledge, and understanding that today's world will increasingly demand of us. If you Google the phrase 21st century teaching and learning, you will find over 10 million places on the web that you can find information about it. 3 explosions are driving this discussion. The first is the rapid interconnectedness, growing interconnectedness of the world. Several years ago, the Pulitzer Prize-winning writer Thomas Friedman wrote a book called The World is Flat, which remains a valuable collection of information and thought about the world's increasing interconnectedness. In it, Mr. Friedman points out that so many professions, business, medicine, law, education, are all part of the global interconnectedness. You've heard a lot about the term offshoring, I'm sure, which refers to sending work abroad to be done by workers in another country. I lived in North Carolina for several years, and for many years the manufacture of furniture was a vital component of the North Carolina economy. Now the significant majority of furniture sold in the United States is manufactured abroad because it costs companies less to ship the wood to Southeast Asia, construct the furniture there, and ship it back to the U.S. The furniture industry and other businesses make the decision to offshore because they operate in a globally competitive environment, and if another company can manufacture a product of similar quality for less cost, then that company gains a competitive advantage. Offshoring, interestingly enough, is beginning to happen in other countries as well. There is a company in Georgia, the United States, that makes chopsticks and sells them to buyers in China. Chopsticks are made from pine, and pine is plentiful in the Southeast. Turns out it is more economical for Chinese buyers to purchase the chopsticks here, ship them to China, and sell them there. I'm not really sure whether they have stamped on them, made in the US. So as Thomas Friedman pointed out a few years ago, the world is flat. And the question is, what impact does this global competition and global opportunity have on education? The second driver of this discussion is the explosion in information technology. You know much more about this than I do because you use this technology far more often and far more easily than I do. You've increasingly seen this in Kinkaid's classrooms, and you understand the enormous resources of information that are available to you worldwide. Let me give you a quick example. This summer, my wife, my 2 sisters, and I were sitting in a restaurant on the Dingle Peninsula in southwest Ireland, a stunningly beautiful but somewhat remote part of Ireland. We were talking about my mother, who passed away 12 years ago, and something made me think of a poem by Billy Collins, a former poet laureate of the U.S., about a lanyard that he had made for his mother when he was in camp. I was trying to tell my sisters about this poem, and then I realized that I might find it on the web. I Googled it, up it came, and I read it to the group, so much better than my stumbling around trying to recall It is actually a cool poem and sort of short. Let me read it to you. If you've ever been to camp or made something for your mother, you will like this poem. The other day, I was ricocheting slowly off the blue walls of this room, moving as if underwater from typewriter to piano, from bookshelf to envelope lying on the floor, when I found myself in the L section of the dictionary, where my eyes fell upon the word lanyard. No cookie nibbled by a French novelist could send me into the past more suddenly, a past where I sat at a workbench at a camp by a deep Adirondack lake, learning how to braid long, thin plastic strips into a lanyard, a gift from my mother. I had never seen anyone use a lanyard, or wear one, if that's what you did with them, but that did not keep me from crossing strand over strand again and again until I had made a boxy red and white lanyard for my mother. She gave me life and milk from her breasts, and I gave her a lanyard. She nursed me in many a sick room, lifted spoons of medicine to my lips, laid cold face cloths on my forehead, and then led me out into the airy light and taught me to walk and swim, and I in turn presented her with a lanyard. Here are thousands of meals, she said, and here is clothing and a good education. And here is your lanyard, I replied, which I made with a little help from a counselor. Here is a breathing body and a beating heart, strong legs, bones and teeth, and 2 clear eyes to read the world, she whispered. And here, I said, is the lanyard I made at camp. And here, I wish to say now, is a smaller gift. Not the warm truth that you can never repay your mother, but the rueful admission that when she took the 2-tone lanyard from my hand, I was as sure as a boy could be that this useless, worthless thing I wove out of boredom would be enough to make us even. That's a neat poem. So my iPhone enabled me to read that to my sisters, and we had a wonderful, reflective moment about our mother, who had received more than one lanyard in her life. The ability to access information quickly, to utilize unlimited resources, to communicate instantaneously with people anywhere in the world, these and many other advantages information technology increasingly provides are changing education. The third driver is the explosion in brain research. As Mr. Loach mentioned in his excellent remarks on Wednesday, last week the Kinkaid faculty heard from one of the leading neuroscientists and thinkers in brain research, Dr. David Eagleman, who is a researcher and member of the faculty at Baylor College of Medicine and an acclaimed best-selling author. If you want to learn a little bit about him, go to the web. He was on the Colbert Report, and it is an interesting and hilarious exchange. Dr. Eagleman talked to the Kinkaid faculty last week about implications of brain research on education. 3 points jumped out at me. One was that the brain is wired for speed and efficiency. If given a task, the brain's natural tendency is to move fast. It has to be trained to slow down, think more carefully, consider alternatives, or create context. The task of education, then, is to create tasks for the brain that increasingly challenge it, increasingly cause it to stretch. The second point was the importance of providing students many opportunities to develop creativity. And the third point that jumped out at me was the notion of helping students develop resilience. Dr. Eagleman quoted Winston Churchill that success is moving from failure to failure without a loss of enthusiasm. The willingness to take healthy risks, to invest oneself in an effort that may not prove successful, and to keep going even if the effort is not successful, he said, is critical to any long-term success. These 3 forces, global interconnectedness, information technology, and brain research, are driving educators and others to think about what today's students will need to be successful in the world they will enter as adults. This morning, I am not going to give you a list of skills you will need to be successful in the world you will enter as adults. You already know some of them. Rather, I want to ask you to think about 3 habits that I think you should cultivate this year. They are habits that I believe you will need this year and even more in the future. None will surprise you. In fact, initially you may think I'm talking about talents or abilities. I'm not. I'm really talking about architecture. Think about architecture just for a minute. This morning we gather in an enormously beautiful and functional space, the architecture of which is spectacular. While there was one architectural firm and one principal architect that oversaw the design of this building, there were actually several architects, and by that I mean people who thought hard about what this building should look like from the inside and outside, the use of space within the building, the hallways, and the traffic patterns. An enormous amount of time, care, and thought went into the creation of this beautiful building. But it's not just a building that requires architecture. Part of studying the Declaration of Independence is learning about the intellectual architecture of this document, the ideas it meant to convey, the democratic framework it meant to create, the justifications for declaring independence that it enumerated. The Declaration of Independence has a clear and brilliant architecture. Your life, too, has an architecture. You are building your life on the basis of certain principles. You make architectural decisions every day about what you will do, who you will be, what you will strive for. You plan, you dream, and you build. You may be working on the first floor now, or maybe the second. Perhaps at some point in the past you were dissatisfied with a plan or decision you made and you started over. Your life has an architecture, and in the moments when you are thinking most deeply, when you are the most you are thinking about this architecture. And that is what I would like to ask you to think about this morning. In the 8th or 9th century, an Irish monk worked alone in a monastery in what is now called Switzerland, translating the Bible into Irish. He was one of many Irish monks at work in Ireland and beyond, trying to translate and maintain the Bible and other religious texts. This time in our history was not called the Dark Ages for no reason. Knowledge was not prized widely, and many in power worked not only to discourage learning, but also to destroy books. If you are interested in this, there's a great book called How the Irish Saved Civilization that I recommend. So this particular monk is sitting in his room at work, and he writes a poem comparing his work to that of his cat, whose name was Pangur Ban. Here's the poem. I and Pangur Ban, my cat, 'tis a like task we are at. Hunting mice is his delight, hunting words I sit all night. Better far than praise of men, 'tis to sit with book and pen. Pangur bears me no ill will, he too plies his simple skill. 'Tis a merry thing to see at our tasks, how glad are we, when at home we sit and find entertainment to our mind. Oftentimes a mouse will stray in the hero Pangur's way. Oftentimes my keen thought set takes a meaning in its net. Against the wall he sets his eye, full and fierce and sharp and sly. Against the wall of knowledge I all my little wisdom try. When a mouse darts from its den, oh how glad is Pangur then. Oh what gladness do I prove when I solve the doubts I love. So in peace our tasks we ply, Pangur Ban, my cat, and I. In our arts we find our bliss. I have mine and he has his. Practice every day has made Pangur perfect in his trade. I get wisdom day and night, turning darkness into light. Turning darkness into light. Isn't that a wonderful phrase? Imagine this, 1,200 years ago, a man is sitting in a room alone except for his cat, and he is working to preserve and increase knowledge. He is a modest man with a sense of humor, for he compares his work in skill, motivation, and intent to that of his cat's hunting mice. But the last phrase of his poem betrays his real motivation. Turning darkness into light. This is your job too. Gaining knowledge, generating insight, discovering truths. That is what you ought to be about this year and what the world you will live in as adults will demand. You have much more support than the lonely monk had and access to much cooler entertainment, which in some ways makes your job more difficult. But your task is the same. Kinkaid's motto is Lux per Scientiam, light through knowledge. It was not written by this lonely Irish monk, but it's the same idea, isn't it? The commitment to learning, to developing your intellect is central to your success in school and will be as an adult as well. That is the first habit I encourage you to cultivate. When somebody invents something they think will make a contribution to business, medicine, education, science, engineering, entertainment, they frequently patent the invention of the idea, to prevent others from stealing their research or idea and replicating it. I want to give you some statistics, and they come from the World Intellectual Property Organization. In 2005, over 1/3 of all the international patents were filed in the United States. Germany, a country of great engineers, filed less than 12% of all international patents. Japan, 18%. China, less than 2%. Let's look at 2011. In 2011, the U.S. still leads the world, filing 27% of all the international patents filed that year. Japan, 21%, Germany, a little over 10%, China, 9%. Two things should jump out at you from these statistics. First, the U.S. remains the imaginative driver of the world. You may know that the Kinkaid band, choir, and orchestra traveled to China this summer and gave a number of concerts. One of the Chinese guides made a comment to one of our students that was very interesting. He said, the U.S. makes stuff, the U.S. invents stuff, Japan perfects the stuff, and China reproduces it. He was being humorous, no doubt, but there is some truth there, isn't there? The second thing that should jump out at you from these statistics is that the rest of the world may be gaining ground on the U.S. in the area of inventiveness. Success in the world you will live in as an adult will require the ability and the readiness to use your imagination, to think creatively, to invent. It is easy for anyone walking around Kinkaid to see evidence of student imagination in the art that is posted on walls and in galleries, but it would be a big mistake for you to think that only art students have the opportunity to exercise and develop their imaginations. I read an article recently about Bruce Springsteen, who's still making great music and delivering great concerts at the age of 63. The Rolling Stones are still around and fun to listen to, but they are not writing new music. Mick Jagger was on Saturday Night Live last spring and was hilarious as a caricature of himself. The Boss, on the other hand, just came out with a new album. The author of this article asked one of Springsteen's longest acquaintances to tell him about Springsteen when he was just getting started. Here's what the author says. He recognized in Springsteen a drive to create original work. In those days, he said, you were judged by how well you could copy songs off the radio and play them chord for chord, note for note. Bruce was never good at that, the friend observed. He had a weird ear. He would hear different chords, but he could never hear the right chords. When you have that ability or inability, you immediately become more original. Well, in the long run, guess what? In the long run, original wins. I am confident that every one of your English teachers this year will talk to you about developing your own voice in writing, not simply in replicating someone else's style or rehashing others' insights. Your science teachers will ask you to draw inferences and to think inductively, not simply deductively. In all your classes, there is information, knowledge that you must learn, but in the long run, knowledge without imagination, creativity, and inventiveness just won't win. The final habit I want to ask you to cultivate this year is the habit of integrity. In the last 2 weeks, two high-profile media stars admitted that they were dishonest in their writing. One attributed quotes to Bob Dylan in a book that he actually made up, and the other copied a couple of paragraphs from an article published in the spring and used them as his own words in a piece he wrote just recently. Both have suffered significantly. One may not recover from this, the other probably will, but with a tarnished reputation. Both these individuals are smart, capable people. They are not habitually dishonest, but the lure of the spotlight and the pressure of a deadline led each to take a shortcut. The spotlight shines on you as well. It may be a test that you have not prepared for, or homework that you have not done, or a mistake you made that you would rather not admit. And you should prepare yourself for what you will do when you're in a tight spot. The business section of the New York Times contains a piece called Corner Office, which is a short conversation with the CEO about leadership. Here's what the CEO of Steelcase, the office furniture company, said about this in last Sunday's Times. Whenever I get a chance to talk to to someone young about integrity, I tell them you almost have to practice for those moments when your integrity might be tested. To say it another way, people tend to double down and do bad things under the most extreme pressure. So you say to yourself, imagine I'm an inch away from losing my job. I've had a bad earnings quarter. I know I'm going to have a next quarter that's as bad, and I've got this issue, and I have to do the right thing, but no one will know if I don't. Tell yourself right then, before you get there, that you can do only one thing. Practice that, and it actually works because you've already conditioned yourself when the stakes are altered. Perhaps the most important architecture you will develop this year will be your moral architecture. Be aware that you are designing and building this every day. Every day you are making decisions that create important scaffolding for the kind of person you will be. Okay, if you've been zoning out for the past 15 minutes, wondering when the headmaster will finally stop talking, but you are also aware that your parents might ask you tonight what he had to say, I have your back. Remember 3 I's: intellect, imagination, and integrity. Cultivating these 3 habits will hold you in good stead this year at Kinkaid and in the world you will enter as adults as well. Thank you very much. Let's have a great year.